My name is Marcus Green, and it's my tremendous honor to introduce our esteemed panel today. We have, to my left, Sefriana Day, who is the board president of Washington Bus, a legislative aide as a former campaign manager for Village Isle Fall as well. Give her some love. To her left, we have Michael Charles, a communications consultant. And anything else you want to say? Is that all right? You also helped out with the campaign for Valdosta, this should be known. To Michael's left, we have Isom Guili. Guili. Pardon me. We're all messing up here. It's the heat. No, Isom was a city council candidate in District 8. Yeah. And position 8. Sorry. And lost. Did not advance, but thank you so much for being here with us today. And we have some luminaries in the audience as well. Erica C. Barnett over there, sitting in the corner. Erica. Mark Baumgarten, the Seattle Weekly editor-in-chief. Some of the best journalists, you guys are now the only weekly in the city now. So the stranger has gone. Okay. And then a couple other luminaries, a mayoral candidate as well is in the midst, Carrie Moon. So now let's go ahead and get this panel underway. Starting with the first question here. Now that it looks like the smoke has settled somewhat within this primary season, we're left with two women, it's looking like, with the Seattle Times calling the race today. Two women who will be vying to move on to the general election. We had 4 women who finished in the top 4. We had candidates of color who finished above the one white, cisgendered, straight, identifying male in the race, and the former mayor. So what are your takeaways? What's the good, bad, and ugly of this election season? Michael, what do you think?
All right, well thank you for having me here as well this evening. It's a pleasure to be here and talking about what I thought was one of the most exciting races since I've ever been here in Seattle. This has definitely been the energy, the excitement, the variation of folks that were involved in this was a lot of fun. As far as the good went, to be honest, it was really exciting to see Nikita get a lot of energy up there and get a lot of people who had not been traditionally engaged, especially in a summer primary, to turn out. I really believe that the 40% turnout we saw was reflective of her doing a lot of turnout efforts to get less traditional voters out, and I think that was really what was good. The bad, how important money was still in this election. I mean, I think it went 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we messed up 5 a little bit, but that was Bob. So, but going 1, 2, 3, 4 of who spent the most money ended up being the people who got through, and I thought that was pretty disappointing to see that it was, for how much we talk about we don't want money to be in politics, it was still the most important part of the race. And then the ugly, I thought the ugly was seeing some of our candidates' opinions on some basic issues regarding compassion and human rights, and I'll just leave that at that for folks to figure out where I'm going with that. But
Are you going to elaborate?
I mean, yeah, I was frustrated with the idea of homeless sweeps being acceptable to some folks, single-family housing still being a priority for some candidates and not changing zoning requirements in certain areas. These were some things that I thought negatively impact in particular communities of color, and I thought that to me was a frustration when the buzzword around this whole campaign was we care about people of color, and it's really frustrating to see, and policies don't reflect that type of behavior, and I thought that was particularly distressing in what we are seeing as moving forward. And I think that there needs to just be greater thought put into that, what's actually affecting those most disadvantaged populations.
Thank you for having me here. The most exciting part of this race for me was how many qualified people were running and how many different ideas were being brought to the table, which allowed people to see themselves in the candidates. I think the reason Nikita's experience running for office was so influential is that people who had been marginalized could see success, and they could see how organization could get them a place at the table where they could make decisions. And that was really powerful to see. As far as the bad part, is that I think that when we're talking about sort of how race impacts elections, it was really apparent at the beginning how Nikita was sort of shaped as this Black Lives Matter candidate, which has a connotation and a conversation. And I think that the labels we use to describe people matter. And to see it repeatedly put in the press reinforced a narrative that disengaged from the rest of the complexity of her intersectional life. And she brought that out, which I thought was just brilliant in decoding the headlines, where she did a YouTube video specifically talking about this. As far as the ugly goes, I think the thing that is most disappointing to me is that the front runner in this race, in my opinion, has the least complexity in their ideas of how to solve the most pressing issues in Seattle. And that's concerning to me. And it gets to this idea how money is incredibly influential in races. Even in my own race, we were only talking about big money candidates as the front runners in our race, despite the fact that there were lots of qualified people who could have easily taken that seat and done a lot of good work. And so I think what's disappointing to me and still ugly is exactly as you described, where money is still a huge issue in how we decide who's viable in races.
That was a lot of good things said. Thank you for having me as well. I would say that, I don't know if I break it down good, bad, and ugly, but I think of in terms of kind of what I take from the election in kind of a positive way is that yes, money played a role. I think the person that kind of came out on top did have the most money. I think the next person in line, who's in the audience, Carrie Moon, thank you for being here. I think that says a ton about you as an individual and as a candidate for being here. Thank you. Is that you're someone who I think has, you're an urbanist, you're about development and including a lot of people. I think that's something that you've talked about in your campaign, and I think what we have to look at moving forward is how do we build density, how do we increase, our city is growing, we can't really necessarily stop that, but how do we mitigate displacement, how do we make sure that people aren't being moved out. I think that's the biggest concern for me, and something that I'm taking away from this race is that, yes, the person that had the most money and had the chamber endorsement, had Seattle Times endorsement, did get the first place, but maybe not I don't know how many percentage of votes you got in terms of everyone else kind of combined, but I think that voters really actually care a lot about including everyone in the conversation, and that the next person in line, I'm a policy wonk, I would consider Carrie Moon to be a policy wonk, and that's really exciting to me that a lot of voters in Seattle want someone that really can dig into the issues and figure out how do we have positive solutions moving forward.
I want to talk about something you brought up earlier about how sort of the media's role in, in shaping the narrative for this race. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the top three finishers, they were all endorsed by, the top three papers. You had Jenny Durkin, Seattle Times endorsed, Carrie Moon, a stranger endorsed, Nikita Oliver, the Seattle Weekly endorsed. What role did media play, especially around, candidates of color such as yourself, in sort of crafting these narratives?
So I think we start here, and I thought a lot about this, and the thing that we struggled with in my campaign was how do you get to be a part of the conversation? How do you get 700,000 people of Seattle to notice you when there are competing demands on your time? We in Seattle are inundated by information and issues. And so to get a piece of somebody's time really requires a significant amount of notoriety. So one thing that papers do is they basically give you that conversation piece, right? They can shape a conversation around you. The thing that was striking to me when I was running is I looked at the data of how many people actually can name one city council member, and it turns out that less than 5% of us can actually do that. And this is despite having Shama Sawant, who is a megaphone of an individual and really can drive conversation and people. And so when you're thinking about that, people are inundated by information and will look towards sources that basically provide them information in a consolidated way. And we do this all the time. That's why This Week, or The Week, is one of the most popular magazines, is it consolidates a lot of information so you can quickly read about what's happening. It's why we basically have apps on our phone like Flipbook that basically tell us what's happening in a really fast kind of way. And papers do that. And those endorsements matter. Who is on the front cover matters. Who is on the stranger's cheat sheet matters. Who is the Seattle Times endorsing matters. And in my opinion, when we didn't win the Seattle Times or the Stranger, our election was over. And it was over because we just couldn't reach enough people. And newspapers provide that. So when we're looking at the top 3 candidates, like all of them had these endorsements, right? And one would argue that Justin Farrell was a good candidate, but didn't rise to the level of being notable in the newspaper.
Michael, you got thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a slightly a different angle at first, and I'll go back to kind of what Heisen was saying. But I thought it was particularly, for me, in the context of race, in this race, I was expecting with 2 candidates of color in the mayoral race for the ethnic media in particular to play a more important role, or at least a more definitive role for where their allegiances were lying. And I thought it was particularly interesting that, especially like the African American media, like the Medium and the Facts, as well as Asian media with International Examiner and other folks, they weren't particularly taking sides in this race. And where I thought that identity played such an important part for the candidates and what they were saying and who they were, it was really interesting to not have the ethnic media play any role in that discussion, not really take a side in any way. And I was doing communications for Bob, and clearly that was frustrating for me, because I really thought that there would be some ability for at least like the Asian newspapers to be excited about the idea of a first Asian mayor ever. There was really no response whatsoever on that, and there was, many discussions about how, well, we'll wait till the primary, and I told them, like, you might not get through the primary if you don't play a role. And I think now, as the results have played out, I don't think that it's negative in any way for our city, but at least for our communities of color, there was a loss there when they had an opportunity to take a side, take an opinion, and they didn't. But as far as the larger media as a whole, I thought that it was actually, they did a pretty good job of, at least once Nikita came out with that video snapping off at the Seattle Times, you never once again saw them refer to her as anything less than activist and attorney and educator. They didn't do a good job of covering her after that, but at least they gave her the respect to call her an appropriate title of actually how she should be described in the newspaper. So I thought that was a win as far as calling papers out and getting that across. But there's still a long way to go. Hashtag journalism so white. That was in the middle of the campaign, and I believe the next day there was a big issue with something they covered. But I mean, that's a long uphill battle to continue fighting, but I did think it was interesting, and a lot of the bloggers, local bloggers and stuff, as I would have conversations with them and point out things that I found to be racist or have racial undertones that were disrespectful, that they did a good job of at least making up for it or not continuing to use similar language moving forward. So.
Yeah, I would say it's problematic that we have to always have that clapback when this stuff keeps happening. Because I think at the Emerald, since I think you said I'm on the board of the Emerald, I'm on the board of everything, but on the board of the Emerald. So something that we often deal with is how the Seattle Times, which is the paper of record in our city, portrays the South End. And I think in this race, as we're talking about mostly the mayor's race, but in position 9, they endorsed a very problematic person who, my boss, I mean, I work for Councilmember Burgess. Everything I say here is completely my opinion, not his. But he was concerned about that. And I think that it's troubling when the media that we all are listening to is primarily, unable to connect with a huge part of our city and our values. And I think most of us are here because we want to talk about race, we want to talk about how can we, be good allies or be more involved. And I think that it's really problematic to me when our kind of main newspaper is doesn't even get us and can't really even tell our story in a way that's respectful.
So we had about 40% turnout for this race, for the mayoral race, which is like atrocious in most modern democracies. With it's good relative in a primary here in Seattle. As you said, as many of you have mentioned, there's been a lot of folks who've been energized for this race with folks like Nikita and other folks. Is there sort of a fear that people who've participated in this race now that they sort of drop out of participating in electoral politics, or that they apathy is sort of stirred within them because they didn't end up getting the result that they wished for?
You're looking at me, so I'll answer. I would say that's always the fear, and I think that we tend to have candidates, like we had Obama, locally we had Sawant, we had Pramila Jayapal a couple of times running, now we have Nikita. I mean, these are all candidates that are incredibly powerful, I think, in their presence, and they're able to really mobilize people. And I think along the way we also have issues. Like we have 15 in SeaTac, we have 15 in Seattle, we've got a lot of different campaigns that kind of get people riled up. But I think my biggest concern, because I come from this kind of civic engagement world, is like, how do we just get people wanting to vote and get involved when it's not necessarily the coolest thing to do? How do we get people registered to vote at the moment they turn 18, and how do we keep people engaged in the process? I think that's something that's of primary importance, I think, even when it's not the coolest race. Like there might be a February special election, and it'd be awesome if everyone voted. Because then when the next candidate comes along that people are really fired up about, we aren't doing voter registration drives. I think even on Pramila's campaign, when we ran for Senate in the 37th, we were registering people to vote because we really wanted to increase voter turnout. And in the end, we were like, did we increase voter turnout? I really hope we did for people of color, and we didn't. Because it's really, really hard, because it takes years and years and years to get people, I think, really engaged and actually engage in their democracy on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'm like incredibly concerned as a leftist, liberal Democrat here that we're so dependent upon the cult of personality to get people out that it's really important for us to love our candidates, for us to find them pure and exciting and somebody we can connect with, when the reality of politics is that's not what it takes. Like, you need people with good policies, that understand how to get things done, that have relationships and community building ability. Like, I'm terribly concerned about the left they say the left needs to fall in love while the right falls in line. And I think like there needs to be some type of understanding from us as liberals that it's important to coalesce around whatever candidate comes out of democracy. Like that's the part of democracy we don't have to love, but in order to get our ideas across, to get our message across, we have to really come and join up when there's somebody that we don't agree with, but is a good compromise for us to be able to get our values across. And so, yeah, I'm terribly concerned that the idea of us needing to love our I'm worried that the people that turned out for this primary election are going to say, well, the system's rigged, like, we're screwed, we didn't get what we wanted. To me, like, that call to drop out was a symptom of this, where I'm just terribly concerned at the idea of, if I don't adore my candidate and they lose, then forget politics. Like, that's just not an acceptable way for us to be able to get our message across moving forward, and for us to maintain power in a way that's sustainable for a long period of time. As much as Donald Trump, I bet you talk to most people on the right, they don't like Donald Trump. But you know what? He's going to put in judges they like. He's going to put in, he's going to support senators and representatives that they like to get their message across. Because at the end of the day, they think of it as a bigger picture issue, that politics to them is issues and ideas, not people. So while that is lacking in its own ideology, I feel like that our ideology needs to begin to embrace ideas and policies more importantly than just people. So.
Yeah, so I'm curious, did this whole scenario, did this put you off from running again as a
No, because I'm an optimist. I am an optimist, and I believe that that there is a short-term strategy and there's a long-term strategy. And the truth of the matter is that if you basically make decisions on what is happening now and miss the bigger picture, you really are failing yourself. No one basically becomes a doctor by basically being like, well, I'm going to med school for a year and then I'm going to be a doctor. That's just not how this works. In order to become a really good doctor, it's years of honing your skills. It's not just going through medical school. It's not just residency. It's seeing patient after patient after patient. And that daily grind of seeing people and trying to decipher what's different about this person to that person. So I am not dissuaded from running. I am actually really optimistic about the energy that was created during this race, and I think that's really exciting. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to spend my time, right? Because, you know, at the end, time is the only variable that matters. When I'm thinking about this question that you brought up, there is the narrative that if we were to participate in elections, that even if we were to participate as people of color, it wouldn't change the system, because we're not really winning very many seats or very important seats. But that sort of mentality has been taught to us. We have been told that the reason why these seats are not important is they don't do anything. But the truth of the matter is they do things, and they further the conversation. So when I was thinking about sort of my friends who were basically voting, I said, did you vote? And they said, no. And I said, you're my friend. And you didn't vote? And they're like, well, you weren't going to win anyway. Oh. But that is the conversation people are having. And I was like, why do you say that? They're like, well, I mean, really, the top 3 people are these people. I know you and I like you, but who else would vote for you? It's like, well, 500 people did. But the truth of the matter is this. It's like, I don't care if they voted for me. But they were like, I'm really bummed out Nikita didn't win. Well, if you would have voted, that may have been a different result. But it's the conversations we're telling ourselves that our vote doesn't matter, and that civil politics happening locally doesn't matter. Because all we hear about is what's happening federally. But the truth is, what's happening on the federal level has very little to do with what's happening to us like in our day in and day out. I was surprised before I ran for city council how influential city council is in my life, and how little I knew about what they did, and how there was no real accountability to their actions. I mean, and that shocked me. And so when I'm thinking about what's important now, is I think you're right. But we need to be talking about what are our ideas, what's the conversation we want to be pushing forward, as opposed to, is it the best candidate? It may not be the best candidate, you may not love everything about them, you may have loved someone else. But in the end, what are our ideas and how do we want to shape the conversation so it will be different for the people who are coming after us? And so my running really is about how do we talk about like Muslims being in a place where they have a voice and we're not seen as terrorists trying to blow up buildings. And I would not, and the thing that's been very concerning about my race is that before I can even talk about my idea, I have to make them feel comfortable with me being Muslim. And that is a conversation that Donald Trump is publicizing nationally. And whether or not you believe Muslims are terrorists or not, because you've heard it so much, I have to negate it. Because I have to negate it, it's already in your mind. Which then means it's an uphill battle for me to prove my worth to you. Which is a struggle. And that happens regardless of your race, your ethnicity, your gender, and women can talk about this. Like, despite being qualified, they have to make you accept that they're a woman first, and that their credentials then warrant them to be in a position of power. Being gay, it's all of these things that are interrelated. Until we're talking about that interrelation of all of these things that basically oppress us, and how those things are the first thing we have to talk about before we actually talk about policy, I think the left is going to continue to lose consistently. Because while we're fighting over our identities, the right isn't. And that's a significant problem for our side.
Well, Mark, you brought it up earlier, but Maxim and Sarah, I'm curious, what do you make of the notion that's that's going around of people saying that certain candidates should have stepped aside, either at the beginning of the race or now, to make way for other candidates? Does that argument carry weight with you guys?
For me, no. No, I don't think people should step aside. And here's why. Is that we need to send a message to our group that if you want to win races, you have to show up. You have to. You have to show up. If you want to win, you've got to be there at the ballot. And I know it's hard. I know there's a lot of competing factors for your time and energy, but this is effing important. Without it, you are at the mercy of everybody else. Now, I think in watching this election, the call has been for Carrie Newman to step aside, and I don't agree with that. No one asked Mike McGinn to step aside. No one asked Bob Hasagawa to step aside. No one asked Justin Farrell to step aside. I don't think that's the right thing to be doing. Not at this point in time. I think what would be powerful now, what I would love to see, Carrie, is this coalition between Carrie and Nikita's people would be phenomenal. This would be something that could really change what happened in Seattle. They're powerful women who have lots of experience, who could collaborate together and really transform the city to something different and special. And thinking about that gives me goosebumps because I know that there's so much passion from these two individuals, and that really they're smart. And the one thing that surprised me about Carrie's election, it's weird talking about you because you're here, is that Carrie never came out and said, I'm second place, which I found interesting, right? The media said she was second, but she didn't say she was second. She actually encouraged her people to engage in trying to get all of these bad ballots fixed. And I thought that was the classiest thing ever. And what made it classy was, if I'm gonna win, I'm gonna win because I got the most votes, not because the system was rigged, even though we know the system has problems. Good job.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree with you. But I just will add add to that I think that there is a bit of a problem in Seattle where we let the perfect be the enemy of the good all the time. I speak from experience working for a council member who often is kind of, receiving those sorts of attitudes. I think that it's really problematic when we're not able to come together because it is so easy to tear us down if we don't. So I completely agree, and I think that it's a really, we have, what month is it? It's August. We have a few months to actually, I think, really inform potentially the platform, the policies that we can really, I don't know, we're at a historic moment. We're about to have our first woman mayor.
Yeah.
Like, come on. And she's sitting right here in this room. I'm just saying that we really have an opportunity to work together, and I think that's incredibly important.
So I'm coming at this a little bit differently. I agree with you guys, however, I think it's really important that this conversation is happening publicly because it acknowledges that there's people that have these feelings. And we need to respect people and understand where they're coming from before we immediately dismiss it as absurd. I think it's important to know that if people are feeling like this, that there's probably a reason why. There's probably a historical reason why. There's probably a reason that involves a lot of pain and trauma involved in that discussion, and it's important for us to acknowledge that. Once we've acknowledged that, I think it's okay for us to say, well, that's kind of crazy, but because there's rules and laws and all sorts of other reasons that that's not possible. However, that's where I believe it becomes Carrie's responsibility, but in addition to other folks' responsibility to find out why that conversation is taking place, find out who these people are that are feeling this way, and then you have to sit down with these people and talk to them. I mean, this is not going to go away just because we think it's crazy. I mean, I believe all three of us, four of us up here are political elites in this city. Like, we don't have the ability to tell people that they're wrong or that they're crazy or that what they feel is wrong, because that's how we end up in this situation where we feel like people that have more money and have more of this are more acceptable and more real because we're not acknowledging the truths of other folks. So I think it's important for us, while acknowledging how they feel that way, what can we do to meet them halfway and understand that you need, like, if what you believe is real, if this is the conversation you want to have about privilege, about understanding of where Nikita was running from, then let's facilitate that conversation. Let's put together a forum where this can be hashed out and we can have some real coming together, not just through the newspaper or through an email or through whatever. We're saying we feel you, we agree with you, but you need to get behind me if you want to win. Because that's a losing message in my head, well, especially with these people that are feeling like you already don't give a shit about them. Like, how do we connect those bridges in, like, actual practice? So while I don't agree with them personally, and I see a political reality that calculus doesn't allow them to ever have that conversation, if she steps aside, I think it's like, we cannot fail to acknowledge that these people feel this way and that this is an important voice in our city of disadvantaged individuals that we need to bring into the conversation, not call out. It goes both ways.
I just want to say something on that. And I definitely agree that we should be acknowledging people. As a psychiatrist, there's lots of different types of therapy that exists. And there's psychoanalytical psychodynamic therapy, which is basically sit on the couch, tell me your problems, and then we'll somehow get to some resolution of your issues. Think very Freudian, very sigmoid, where you're basically just talking about your life. And then there's other types of therapy that are more active. Now, if you look at the data between these two types of therapies, psychoanalytical psychodynamic therapy, although expensive, actually does not help people at all move forward. At all. It actually doesn't change their outcomes at all. We do it, we charge a lot of money for it, people go to it, people like it, but overall, it doesn't actually improve your life. Because there's no active part of it, other than just venting. Venting is important. Knowing where people are coming from is important because that's how you build a bridge. But what I am concerned about in this race is that if we are just listening to venting and we're just listening to like, this is the system and it's always broken and it never works. And because of that, what we also saw happen on the national scene with the Bernie candidates, like the Bernocrats, who are like, well, F it, I'm not gonna participate, or I'm not gonna throw my vote behind Hillary, is what we have now seen is a disaster on the national level. And my concern is that can happen on a local level. And I'm not saying that people should just fall in line with a candidate just because, but we should be trying to figure out how we can build bridges between candidates who have not been successful and candidates that have been able to move forward to push our agendas forward and talk about what is the conversation we want to be having. And so I am very much an active person. You have to do something. If you do nothing, time will just decide for you. You are making a choice not to do that.
So it is looking like that we're going to have two cisgendered women that will be battling out for mayor. That being said, how do they go about fighting against structural racism here in the city? One of them might be here to take some votes.
Well, that letter talked a lot about allyship, and I think Seattle is a city of white allies. And I think that I think Seattle is so good at academically understanding oppression and racism and equity. I work at the city where we have a race and social justice initiative where we look at every policy through this great lens, and then we pass this sweetened beverage tax and we fund great programs with it. But we did the RSGI toolkit. So I think that we have these tools, we academically understand it, and we have the words for it, but the letter, and I think that you spoke a bit to this, just understanding kind of what's behind it, the feelings, the emotion. That letter was saying how can you be a good white ally? And I think that is a question, as a person of color, I don't necessarily want to be the one to answer that, or I don't necessarily know what the answer is. But I feel like it begs the question, and it's something I would want, these mayoral candidates to grapple with. Like, what does allyship really look like? What does it mean to really show up for communities of color so that we aren't having gaffes happen like have happened in the past mayoral 4 years and with Seattle Times, like things like that where you know that you messed up because someone's calling you out on it. Like, how can we not have those moments? Like, it'd be great to have moments where we aren't having to call people out and demand apologies and things like that. So I think I completely forgot what your actual question was, but it just reminded me of how much work there is to do. And we live in a city that is so progressive, but so many people are kind of left out of the conversation. And how do we authentically bring them in? So it speaks back to your point, Michael.
Yeah, so I have two recommendations. Not that they're the two silver bullets by any means or anything like that, but one is being intentional, and that's what I mean by being intentional is, are you talking about issues of race? Are you talking about people of color and their issues? Are you talking to people of color and asking them what their issues are? Are you being serious in your policies to be intentional about talking about how this is going to affect communities of color? Intentionality is number one. But number two, and this is the one that I feel like Democrats fail at constantly, and that's hiring people of color. Like, it's not that, it is not a dramatic step to say there's two people who are equal strengths, there's one who's a person of color, there's one who's not. I need to hire the person of color because they're just going to do a better job representing populations that are typically underserved by government and have been left out in this conversation forever. I know this person's going to be upset that they didn't get hired, but I just cannot in good conscience not hire this person of color. That has to be your mindset when you go into this, and if you don't, you are failing communities of color. For all the flack Mayor Murray is taking throughout this entire campaign and whatnot, and through his administration, this man hired people of color. Lots of people of color. The one thing you will hear from most communities of color that are a fan of Mayor Murray is that he hired lots of people of color. And I think that's an absolutely essential step. Now, did he put them on leadership and all that? That's a whole other conversation. But it's really important to put people of color at the forefront. And I see you shaking your head back there, but he really did. And I mean, there's one right there. There's a lot of them in this room tonight. Like, there's people here who've really benefited from this. And it is actually the truth. Like, the economic director is a black male from, I mean, these are like important steps we have to be taking to move forward as a community, understanding that if we're going to put our administrators have to look like our people just as much as our leaders do.
Why doesn't that extend to mayor? So like, this is the whole student labor conversation, and this is what I thought on the
Just so you know, we are going to do questions right after this. Right after
Can I address this though?
If you want to.
Yeah, sure. Well,
what is the question?
so her question was, how does that not also extend into the mayoral position? Like, why is the responsibility only to hire people of color? Why shouldn't we hire a mayor that's also a person of color? Great point. We tried.
Seattle's 70% white.
There were 2 people on the ballot that were people of color. I'm not going to fault the voters for not understanding entirely what privilege is for what. Because if we're going to ask over 200,000 voters to do this, then that's your responsibility, my responsibility, everybody else's responsibility to make sure that we're educating our allies, to make sure they know why it's important to put people of color. But if we as people of color are going to support a white candidate, it's our responsibility to make sure that we at least hold them accountable in the way that we have the power to do so. We don't have the numbers in this city that a Mississippi town has to put in the black mayor that's really radical and exciting. We don't have Baltimore numbers to put a black candidate in there that's really exciting, but what we do have is the ability to put pressure on our leaders to make sure that we're represented in other areas where otherwise we wouldn't be represented. So while I agree with you, and I think it would be beautiful to have a mayor of color, that's just not the political reality of how it worked out, and it's not in the calculus this time. But moving forward, if you have a candidate who's qualified now, according to what white people consider qualified, for example, we put our deputy mayor in as a person of color, that person now fits qualifications for white people up north to say, well, I can't ignore that they've done this position before and that they're qualified to become mayor moving forward. So while I want to be upset about maybe how this turned out this time, if I want it to be the way I want it to be moving forward, let's put people in positions to have experience so that there isn't an argument against them moving forward when they run next time and we are trying to get a person of color into that position. So I agree with you, it sucks. It's not the most exciting thing, but at the same time, that's on us, really, at the end of the day. So,
Talking about allyship, the 2 things that I think are important is your humanity, which really is about reaching the people on a real level and understanding and connecting and listening. I think that we do not place enough emphasis on our humanity and what actually connects us as opposed to what separates us. I think the second thing when you're talking about allyship is humility. And there's a real lack of humility that you don't have to have all the answers to solving all of people of color's problems. That is actually not your job. Your job is to allow the space for people of color to provide you answers to their most pressing issues. And that humility is really important. Because I think when we think about elected leaders, we think that they're supposed to have all of the answers to our most complicated issues. And that is our expectation of people of leadership. But the truth of the matter is a really effective leader recognizes what they know and what they don't know. And what they don't know, they rely on people who know. And they listen to them. And they try to understand their point of view. And then act in a responsible way while giving them dignity and validating their perspective. And I think that's really what is about politics in general, is that real political movers have those 2 qualities and are able to push people's agenda while using their privilege to do so. Just from my own personal perspective, I knew that I was male. And I knew that my mom, who was female, was not afforded the same opportunities as I was. So how you use my maleness to further my mom's issues is important. And how one does that is important. And that it is intentional. And that is coming from a place of humility. I will never understand what it's like to be a woman. But I've talked to a lot of women about what their experience is about, and I've asked them what I can do to further their agenda. And that's what it means to be a real ally. Take that step back, leave your ego at the door, accept your humanity and humility, and allow other voices to be heard, and to give them weight, and to elect them to places of power. One of the things that people of color always run into, which is the first thing, which happened with Nikita, is how are you qualified to be in this role? Right? That was the first thing they asked about. Then when she basically said, I did all this stuff, and they're like, but you don't vote. I mean, it just was like one thing after another. And this is one thing I do want to talk about, is that white, male, heterosexual candidates can be adequate. And we think they're amazing. And people of color, people who are gay, people who don't identify in the norms, have to prove themselves repeatedly why they are qualified and justify their existence for why they can be in that role. And that's our conversation. And it's exactly how the Seattle Times looks at these two candidates in 9 and makes a decision, which I think is, I didn't understand it.
Okay, so a final question for me. You talked about this sort of this allyship mentality. How do we infect the rest of white Seattleites with that mentality? You have this influx of newcomers being driven by the tech industry. The tech industry is no paragon of diversity, and as we know, that recent Google memo. So how do we expand this mindset to the rest of Seattle? Right? The Black, brown, indigenous folks don't have the numbers to sort of advance things through the ballot box on their own without the majority of white folks pushing it as well in terms of the vote. So how do we do this?
I'm going to leave this to white people to do. And the reason I say that is that we are having the conversations all the time. All the time, we're having these conversations. It really happens at cocktail parties. It's cocktail conversation, right? It's those subtle hints of racism and sexism that happen while you're sitting there eating Cheetos. It's those kinds of things that basically reinforce narratives that we believe in, right? The human brain is really complex, but overall it's very simple. Meaning that the human brain wants to reduce everything into bite-sized pieces so it can understand it. And it's very easy to basically put people in boxes and to follow scripts, because then you don't have to think about it, because you have lots of other things to think about. And so when someone says, oh yeah, that's a Black Lives Matter candidate, if you say nothing, that just reinforces whatever idea you have of what a Black Lives candidate is, right? Where instead, it requires individuals who are white to get educated and to really hold themselves accountable to the things that they say. And then to apologize for when they make a mistake. And it's okay to make mistakes. What's not okay is then to get defensive about that, which we see all the time. Which is, once you basically make a mistake, we see white people as like, that's not what I meant. And I think we can look at a very classic example of this happening in the mayoral race, where one of the candidates called people colored people, and their response was, Sam Spicer got the best of me. Is that really what we believe? Right? Is that really enough? those are the conversations that people need to be having. It's like, what does that mean? It's not just a gaffe. It's not because colored people has a connotation to it, right? There's baggage to colored people. It's a label. We talk about it. Like, it's important to just say it so flippantly and not give it the apology it deserves is really doing a disservice to people of color.
I like what Heisman had to say for sure. In addition to that though, I was really inspired by Nikita and Bob for one thing is we need to get more people of color running for office. You elevated yourself. I have never had so many conversations about race with so many white people than I have during the last 3 months, talking about Nikita, about Bob, about those dynamics, about all that. Like, they had a platform to speak every single day, every week, about being of a certain race in this city and how that affected them. That is so important. In addition to that though, how do we get more people to turn out to vote for these candidates of color? I think those two things together, in addition to what Heisman was saying, is something that can be really powerful, helping move that discussion forward in the future. I don't think that had Nikita and Bob not been in this race, that there would have been any discussion about race. Again, I think it would have been all about transportation, homelessness, and this, and whatever else. But what we've had to have a serious discussion about over and over again is Nikita qualified? Is Bob screwing over Nikita? Is this happening or another? And it's like, so important that we're having these conversations in a public sphere because these are otherwise backroom conversations that we're not talking about or they're only amongst people of color. I think a lot of people had to check themselves and their privilege because they were socialists or they were whatnot and they had to decide, am I serious about voting for a person of color or not? I don't think most of those people have ever had to have that conversation in their heads. So how do we continue as people of color, how do we continue to be exceptional and step up to the plate and run for office and put ourselves at risk of not hearing the conversations we want to hear, but being able to provide a forum for other folks to continue to talk about this and care about these issues that we obviously think are the most important part of the race.
You completely forgot the question that you asked, because those were great responses, though. But remind me of the question.
How do we infect white Seattleites with the mentality of allyship?
Thank you. Well, earlier I said that I didn't want to have to be the one to talk about what allyship meant. I think because it's exhausting as a person of color to have those answers. But you articulated it so well. I was like, yes, listening, being intentional, yes, that's it. You know, thinking about policy implications, like that's it. That's what I try to do when I'm doing my job. And I think that, yeah, I just think that it's so important for individuals, for everybody really, to check your own privilege for whatever that may be, in all the many boxes of our identities, and to figure out, you know, how do we give room and voice for people to actually express their experience and to really validate it. This is like just a little story, but yesterday I interviewed candidates for the Seattle Youth Commission. It was the best way to end my day. They were brilliant, amazing young people, and one of the questions was, you know, why do you want to serve on the commission? And four of five answered, or 5 of 6 actually answered that youth are the future. We're the future. The last final candidate, my favorite, was like, we are such a big part of the population, like we are right now. And I was like, yes, we are right now. Like young people are right now. And I think that young people of color, marginalized groups, we are now, and we have a voice. We're actually more than the majority, you know, in this country. In Seattle, we're almost 70% white. Like that is the reality. And I think you spoke to that really well, Michael, of just the reality of like, we are not in the majority here, but I think so many populations and different groups of people have a really powerful voice. And we, as allies for other groups of folks that we may not identify with, it's really our job to listen and stand with the other people.
And with that, we're going to open it up to audience questions. Would any of you want to come up?
I'll have a mic over here.
Yeah, you need that. Maybe I should be on record.
So if you have a question, please just come up, or if you prefer or need to, just let me know and I will come to you until I run out of mic cord.
All right, it's a long way up there. I'm just going to speak really loudly. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Thank you guys so much for doing this tonight. And my question has to do with the fact that we haven't said Jenny Durkin's name, and it's important to say Jenny Durkin said the slur. And I don't want that to be confused with anybody else, because it was offensive, and we need to say who said it for accountability. My actual question, though, is, I want to know, kind of from you guys, what is your perception around the front runner, the person who's gained the most votes in this campaign, and the unassailable distance between that person and communities of color? Throughout the whole campaign, we didn't hear that candidate really explicitly lay out a plan to address disparities. But at the same time, we saw the media and many people on the left holding the rest of the field incredibly close around what their plans were around racial equity. Can you guys provide some insight on your thoughts around that essential double standard? Does that make sense?
I don't think we held that candidate to any standard. I think that we allowed that candidate to sort of coast by on her connection to being a prior prosecuting attorney. What I think is really interesting about your question is that sort of following along, like the cool part about running for office, you get an inside view of everything. You get to see people, and you get to see how they interact with people, and you get to get a sense of what's actually happening. What I always found fascinating about the endorsement questionnaires is that everyone would have submitted theirs, and then she would be the last person to submit, which I found fascinating. My personal opinion about this is that I think that moving forward with the two candidates, which is Jenny Durkin and Carrie Moon, is that we would be expecting really brilliant ideas and be holding both of them accountable. I think that the way the media portrayed it was there was too many people to really get a sense of anyone's really particular view. But I think moving forward, I would expect that both candidates have a really good plan for how they're going to address this racial disparity that's existing in our city. And I think for the business candidate, Jenny Durkin, there is a huge divide in our city between those who have and those who have not, those who are cash poor and those who are cash rich. And how she plans on bridging that gap so that we don't see this increasing disparity in our city and the push out that's happening in a lot of our people of color populations.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I don't know. I think part of the reason why that, I guess it was a double standard, was that some candidates didn't really center race, and I think that Nikita Oliver, I think Bob Hostabella centered race in their conversation, and so that's what the media talked about. And if you're not talking about race, then we don't have to talk about race. And it's kind of easy to not talk about race in Seattle, honestly. Like, I think that it's, if we look at who votes in primary elections, it's pretty easy not to talk about race and to get right through, so.
Thanks for your question, EJ. For me, the reason I didn't want to name Jenny Durkin in particular is because it's what she represents, not her necessarily. And the idea that for me, like, Jenny Durkin is the epitome of a certain sect of values for certain Seattleites. I mean, if you look at the heat maps of where her votes came out, it was, I mean, you could have predicted it beforehand, like to a T. It was the Gold Coast, because, and then downtown, like that's where her votes came from. So why does she not have to answer race in the media? Because she doesn't give a shit. Like, frankly, like, she doesn't have to give a shit. Because for her to get through, that's not important for her. There's certain cold calculus in politics, which you're especially very much aware of, that is all about what does it take to win. You don't have to talk about race in Seattle to get 51% to get through.
It might actually hurt you if you do.
And I think for her, she does not give a shit because she wants to win. And I think that unless us as voters are going to do a good job of holding her accountable and building a coalition with candidates that do give a shit, that we're going to continue to not have any answers, because it's not like the Seattle Times are sitting down and having breaking exclusives with people about how do you think you're going to take care of black people in Seattle. That's not even on the conversation radar. So I think that it's not a surprise. It's not something that any of us would be particularly think is disqualifying for most candidates. So how do we make that the most important issues? And I think we can expect Jenny to talk about it, but what we can do is show up to forums. We can show up to other areas and make her talk about these issues. I know when I was here in 2009, when Mike McGinn was running versus Joe Mallahan, there was a very coordinated effort of folks to come. And I remember being in this very room, at this very place right here, where there was an organizing strategy where the whole point of it was to come during open mic and ask questions and make Joe Mallahan be on the record about how he doesn't care about people of color. And Mike McGinn walked away with that, and he was able to build a coalition because he cared. And he did things to show he cared. So we can just let the media do what the media does, or we can control the conversation, which is like the power we have as people. When we talk about people power, it's not just at the voting box. It's not just that. It's the power to hold conversations and make people care about issues they otherwise wouldn't care about. So I think it's really important, again, like, we cannot look outward for answers, we have to look inward, and we have to continue to ask ourselves, what can we do creatively to build a powerful coalition? Because again, we're not in the minority. Like I said, you don't need us to win, but we need the right candidates to win, and the way we can do that is by pushing the conversation in our favor for that issue in particular.
More questions?
I'll just ask it. But, so I was just curious, assuming that the numbers hold and that Kerry goes through in general, what do you think Nikita Oliver's next step should be? Or what do you foresee for her?
Man, I'd ask Nikita. I hope she runs for city council.
Yeah, she just moved to Rainier Beach, y'all.
Yeah.
Just saying, District 2.
But in all seriousness, right? Like,
Yes, in all seriousness.
I personally believe she would probably have quite an easy election if that were the case. And I would love to see Bruce Harrell have to have these conversations with somebody who's actually woke, who can stand toe-to-toe with him on every single issue, and be excited about this. Like, I don't know why we're beating around the bush. She needs to run for city council if she doesn't do this, because she's clearly brought to the forefront a lot of issues and messages that there is a demand for in this town. And what can we do to continue to elevate that conversation, other than what I said, have people of color run for office? And she's been a star, like, there's no denying it. So I think you should all tell her too, she needs to run for city council. Like, we're in that district. I think that she represents a lot of values for a lot of the people down here. We should all be pushing her and other people like her to run for office.
I think parallel to that is, what should the People's Party do? because she's running on this People's Party platform, and I think we had this conversation earlier about, we hope that they don't fizzle out, we hope that they keep, organizing and mobilizing and building other candidates as well, because that's, we don't want it to stop now, there's 2018.
My hope for Nikita Oliver is that she has a moment to reflect on the experience. And what I would love to see, since Carrie is here, is to be given a prominent role in the executive branch, and where she can really make a lot of changes and really further the conversation. I think that running for city council is a great idea. I did it. But, that's 2 years away, and the momentum that she has created. 2 years is a significant amount of time, and that momentum that she's created and developed needs to be carried forward somehow. And what I would really love to see the People's Party do is not just organize, but run a whole ticket. Because I think they could really transform what happened in the city, because they are a collective group that is like-minded but bright. They are full of visionaries. I had an opportunity to meet with the People's Party twice, and both times when I met with them, you look around the room and you see hope and vision and a desire to really make the world a better place. And that kind of passion reminded me of like those great times where all of the artists were in collectives, and they moved movements because they were all like-minded and challenging each other and data-driven and excited. And I would love to see that in politics. And I would love to see a place in the executive branch where that individual could be, where people could say, we're there, we're at the table. We may not have won, but we're in the room. And being in the room, man, that was the whole point of running for city council, is I wanted healthcare to be in the room, to really be there. Not someone who just says, I care about it, but to be there and to center the idea of people's health in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I was just and I agree 100%. First of all, it's beautiful. But at the same time, though, hope is not a strategy. Like, I fell into 2008. I was super excited about President Obama. I worked for President Obama, but I saw what I thought was a lack of strategy to continue to get that excitement engaged. And what I really hope that the People's Party and other folks that are interested in running from the outside is understand that there's folks on the inside that love what you're doing and that have been hoping for you to do exactly this. There's gotta be some way to engage people like Sarah and other folks that are already on the inside working for this change. How do we engage those people with those outside folks to build a coalition that's truly unstoppable? I just want them to be a little more strategic when it comes to working with professionals, to working with people that do care about their mission and care about what they are, instead of painting people with some overarching brush that you're either with us or against us, because that doesn't do anything for your hope either moving forward.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think what's really at the same time, what I think is really important is that when people make decisions, they're actually not using their heads. They're actually using how they feel. And how they feel actually dictates how they have their brain justify it. And so the truth of the matter is that what's important about hope and passion and all of these things is that it inspires people to engage. And if you can get someone to engage, you can then basically, you can help them understand why they feel the way they feel, right? But if you can't get someone to feel anything, and all you're doing is talking about policy points, people look at those things and they just stop reading. So what we really want is people to feel, and hope is, man, hope is like a double-edged sword. I mean, it spurs you forward and breaks your heart. And so that's the problem with politics, right? Is that you are hopeful that basically what you want will move forward. But when it doesn't happen, it breaks your heart and you totally become apathetic and disengaged. But that's why I think hope is so important. Not just the idea, like, not every seedling makes it, but a seedling does and turns into a massive tree. And that's what we have to be talking about, and those types of conversations we need to be having, is that Nikita may not have made it this time, but that doesn't mean, right, that she couldn't have a prominent role in moving forward in something amazing and wonderful and driven. And who knows, maybe like the People's Party will come up with a platform and really be pushing that agenda through every single forum. Who knows what they'll do? But it starts with this idea that they care, they're hopeful, and they're passionate. Because if you have none of those, it doesn't matter how many great ideas you have. It doesn't matter.
So I was just wondering why you think it's a better idea for Nikita to be working within the executive branch as opposed to remaining as a leader of the People's Party, continuing her work within the community and linking up with different groups like Washington Yell or Bus or different Sage or anything like that. That way we can continue on with that community engagement and keep that momentum and keep people moving and go forward without her having to kind of pull back on her power and her influence, which she can actually directly achieve within communities that are being underrepresented.
As someone that works for City Council, I would say that it's possible to do both. And ideally, we can do both. I come from an organizing background, labor and community organizing. I'm not a very good organizer, so I much prefer policy work. So I feel like there's a place for everybody to do revolutionary, transformative work. And my dream is that we would have someone like Nikita, or Nikita herself, you know, in the mayor's office, in a high-powered position, doing that work and bringing people along. Like, as someone that works for a council member, I can speak to the numerous meetings I have with community groups where I'm telling them, like, this is how you advocate, this is how you get what you want. Like, let me help you navigate this system. So I feel like there's such power in being able to do both. And I've seen a lot of people in City Hall that we like elbow each other and we're like, we made it in. Like, we're gonna keep, you know, we're bringing people with us. And I think it's possible to do both, and it's problematic when we think that we can't and that people on the inside are necessarily the enemy or like they're disconnected. I think we have to believe that we can do both or else we'll completely disconnect.
Oh no, don't just.
And I don't think you're saying that, but I just think that it kind of speaks to that hope of like thinking that we can actually be in the system as well and continue to pull our communities along with us.
And I want to be clear, Nikita should do what Nikita wants to do, right? This is Nikita's choice, right? This is Nikita's choice. What my thought about it is it's not an either or thing, right? But I think with what she's done, she needs a voice at the table, right? I think that right now, the People's Party, I love the People's Party, but they're still on the outside. They don't have a seat in the conversation, but they need to. And that's why, like, I would love to see that. If she runs for 2, great, let her be in 2. She runs for the 37th, great, let her be in the 37th. Whatever she wants to do. She is a brilliant mind. She's brilliant. She is a superstar. She has to be part of the conversation, any way possible. And what I would say is that when you're a smart leader, you realize there are smarter people than you, and you bring them into the conversation. And you give them the accountability and the responsibility to change. And that's why I think that, right? If she wants to see a member of the People's Party and push the People's Party and run a whole ticket, I love that plan too. I just love everything Nikita has done. Everything.
I think a great example of being a party leader and being a representative, at least here in Seattle, is Shama. Like, Shama's obviously the head of the SA at the same time, and I mean, she does a great job of being an activist as well as having an actual vote when votes matter, having an actual like platform to get her issues across that doesn't only have to involve her getting her people involved. She's able to reach populations that otherwise wouldn't be involved. Like, as much as I think this issue is stupid personally, like the idea of, she said that she wanted to bring Colin Kaepernick to Seattle. Every newspaper in the area covered it. Like, to me, that's just, like, who cares about that issue? But she has a platform from which to say that makes every newspaper when she does that. If Nikita is deputy mayor and she says something, I guarantee you everybody is going to cover that in every newspaper and have a platform and an ability to affect change that while she has as the party leader, in addition to having a party leader with a real vote, a real conversation, a real power, that can be so much more effective in helping her achieve what she's trying to achieve. Personally, I believe that.
There was a question in the back. And then you.
I'll try to yell it out. Can everybody hear? No. No? What did you say?
Come on down.
All right, so one of the things that surprises me about the left's conversation here in Seattle is that it focuses almost exclusively on the issues of housing and inequality, both of which I think are extraordinarily important. But Seattle's police department is under a consent decree right now. And I never hear the left talk about that. I've actually gone to some of the meetings that the judge has basically where he's talking about it. And it's really remarkable stuff. I mean, these are fundamental constitutional principles as well as matters of life and death. Do you guys think this is a race issue? Should it be a race issue? Why is this not part of the conversation? And when we're talking about what the next mayor is going to have to do, the next mayor is going to have to do this, right? So this has to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, I think you bring up a particularly compelling point. And actually, I want to apologize for not having bringing that up earlier, because I do think that's an important process of what we need to be doing and looking for policy-wise moving forward. And my girlfriend would be furious if I didn't bring it up. So, yeah, I think it's a race issue. It's undeniably a race issue. It's an issue that affects people of color at a shockingly disproportionate rate. If we don't figure this out, the consequences are devastating for generations to come with regards to what we are willing to accept as citizens under the U.S. Constitution. And I think you bring up a great point. And it's important that we figure this out, that we bring in people to have this conversation. And if we aren't talking more about this, then we are failing as citizens and as residents and citizens here in Seattle.
But I would also say that there, from my perspective as working for the council, I think there's a lot of attention being paid to the consent decree and just police brutality in general. If you look at up north with the precinct, if you look at the youth jail, there are a lot of issues that I think on the grassroots level, these conversations are happening. And they're coming to our doorstep at City Hall anytime a meeting happens. So I think, from my perspective, I think it's loud and clear, but that's just my perspective.
For me, my background is in health, and we have our own problems in the healthcare system, sort of in our own racial, social understanding of individuals and the disparities that exist. And so it's no surprise that if it happens in healthcare, it's happening everywhere, because healthcare is supposed to be the most benevolent profession. It's clearly a matter of race. It's clearly a lack of understanding. I think that Seattle police officers in general don't have the necessary training nor professionalism at this point in time. I think they are working on it. I think that it's a process. I think it's going to require a lot of training and effort. You know, when Charlene Lyles was killed, you know, we made a video for my campaign really to talk about mental illness. And I cannot tell you how differently people are treated based upon their skin tone when they're brought in by police officers. And that's just a very practical sense in the mental health system. In addition, if you have any mental illness, you're treated badly. And to give you a good example of that is I have a patient that suffers from bipolar illness who basically has to drink water or will die. And the police officer arrested her because she was manic and psychotic, put her into jail, and when she said, "I have to drink water," he said no, and she was drinking from the toilet. This kind of crap happens all the time in our city, and it is going to require a mayor with vision to come up with how we're going to solve this issue. And it's going to require a lot of conversation and a lot of trust building. I am not sure that one of the candidates, Jenny Durkin, after saying colored people, is the right person to do that. I will leave it to her to do her own soul searching and education to basically correct her mistake.
My question is about the state budget, because of course. And the reason why is we're not talking about the fact that other major U.S. cities' rents and housing affordability are finally dipping. We're the only city, the top 20 city, if I'm correct, where rents are still going up. And we're not even talking about the displacement of entire communities and the fact that because of our recent budget in the state, we're looking at even more of that. And something I especially like to hear your perspective on is, you know, why aren't we planning for that in the future? You know, I keep reading more and more articles about how there's certain professions of people who literally don't live in the city of Seattle. We're all talking about how we're scared to come to San Francisco, and we might already be. So especially as a candidate or somebody's running, you know, I think the damage has already probably been done, but can anything be done? And why wasn't, I mean, I know why they weren't talking about it, but the money probably drowned out your voices, but.
I'm an optimist, so not everything is done. And I think that's important. When we're really talking about this, and sort of these changes that are happening, and I think that you were speaking really eloquently to this, is that we are losing our diversity, and we are becoming more and more homogenous. And I've had conversations about this before, which is you can see it kind of everywhere. You can see it in our architecture, where we're basically losing all of these homes and putting tall, skinny things up. We're seeing it in the loss of culture. We saw it with the displacement of Black and brown people. We're seeing it now with the languages, right? We're seeing like we used to have something like 130 languages spoken in Seattle, and now we've dropped by 20%. And that is happening because we are not intentionally putting Black, brown, and different voices at the forefront of our conversations. If we were to come up with policies that were to say, how can we keep this vulnerable group in the city and change the rhetoric to that, then we would have very different policies, right? We would come up with very different decisions. But if your mentality is, well, the market will just solve itself, then you will continue to see the same things that have happened across the nation. My whole thought is that when we're looking at displacement and push out, is that moving forward with the two mayoral candidates is to be very critical about their housing plans and their affordability plans. And what I'll tell you is the middle class right now becomes a low class in 2 years, right? Is that you just keep eating at the bottom, right? Someone will always be at the bottom, and you just keep eating at the bottom, right? In order to make way for the people who come on from the top. So, you know, one of the things I was a strong proponent of when I was running was how do we talk about extremely low, very low income individuals and middle income earners. In the hospital, we're having significant problems because we can't hire nurses because they can't afford to live in Seattle. Yeah? So if you're looking at a standard nursing salary, you're looking at around $55,000, somewhere in that range. If you're looking at sort of what the median income looks like, this would make housing unaffordable to them, right? And these are the people that we are expecting to take care of you when you're really sick. And this is the same group that we're dealing with when we're talking about burnout rates and how there's not enough hospital employees, which was part of the forefront of my platform, was the hospital system is really broken, and we are seeing all of the failed policies there. Like, we can't get staff to basically stay, we're basically getting rid of unions because we can't pay for them, patients are staying really long because there's no place to send them, we're seeing Black, brown, mental health, and older individuals living in hospitals, and we're seeing that because those are the policies we've created. And I tell people, if you really want to know how your system works, look at healthcare, because all of it will manifest there. When people don't have lights, we see them. Right? When people basically can't afford their insulin, we see it, right? We see all of it because in the end, the only thing you have is your health and your name. And if you get sick because of however hard this is, right? You end up in the hospital.
Yeah, I think we have a revenue crisis as well, where we're continuing to tax the poor and ask them to give more and more and more of their hard-earned, low-paying salaries to a city that is not rewarding them for paying their more than fair share into the system. So we really need to be creative in the ways in which we're generating new revenue. To me, like, I think there's no silver bullet. Obviously, housing has to have like a particularly diverse approach in order to take care of it. But one of the things is building more housing, building public housing, doing whatever. But how do we do that without raising more funds? And I think that's where, like, we get hamstrung oftentimes. And so instead of coming to, ask for another cent tax in your sales increase, we need to look at creative taxes like Carrie's put out, with looking at speculation taxes, looking at, I love the public bank that Bob put out there because I thought it was a creative solution in order to generate more revenue. And you cannot tell me in a time of crisis that we don't need more money, and it needs to not come from poor people, from people of color, and especially not disproportionately so. So when we're looking at this, we need to be more serious in coming up with creative solutions to ensure that we can fund a wide variety and diverse approach to many housing answers. Whether it's public housing, like public-private partnerships, whatever, all of it's going to require money from the city, and unfortunately we have a limited amount of that even when we're so well-to-do in this city. So how do we come up with ways? The income tax is great, but it's going to be caught up in the system for a long time. What can we do now to be creative, to come up with solutions, to get money? It can't be, I have friends that make over 150 G's and they're like, this city is awesome to live in because I don't have to pay much to live here, It's basically like the cheapest big city to live in America if you're rich. That cannot be the case. Like, this cannot be a place where only rich people can have fun and play. We have to understand the economics of being poor in this city and how that is more than, and trust me, I think race is the most important issue for me, at least, dealing with government. But economics is equal, if not just, if even more important of a factor of determining whether you're able to continue to live in Seattle or not at this time. And a lot of that is due to policies that would be helpful not being able to be funded in order to keep people in the city.
Yeah, and I think speaking to housing, I think the city's moving ahead on, we've got things like HALA, the housing affordability and livability agenda, that are kind of moving toward greater zoning capacity and changing things like that. But that hits such a brick wall when we're talking about the city being zoned 60% single family. And I think that's a reality that we want to increase capacity. We want to have backyard cottages, these great, these innovative ideas about how can we just create more affordable housing. I think there's two things. I think there's this brick wall of single family folks, homeowners, sometimes don't love those things. They're worried about parking, they're worried about capacity, but then there's also, we're expanding the light rail, we're obsessed with transit-oriented development, which I love, but what is the impact of that? It means that property values go up and that people move out. So we have to make sure, I think the next mayor has to make sure that we are mitigating displacement, whether it's tax incentive programs so that, developers are actually building affordable, whatever the solution. I think that has to be something that our leaders can really stand by and not cave to the massive group of people that will come to your door saying, we don't want that because we're afraid, when really that is a racist argument and we just have to keep people here. That should be a priority.
We have time for one more question. Yours was first.
Thank you, guys. It's basically two questions in one. What personal and professional advice would you give to a young transplant? I've been in the city about a year, fresh out the Coast Guard. I'm still trying to feel it out, understand everything going on. So just what advice would you guys give?
So I'm on the board of the Washington Bus. We are an awesome organization. I have a fellow board member in the audience, Tiffany. But we're a great organization and we do civic engagement with young people. And we have parties. We actually have a party on Friday at the Bureau Project. You all should come out. And I'm not just plugging this event or this organization, but we do a ton of great engagement work. And we do politics, we do issues, we help people run for office. So I feel like I will say that almost 8 years ago, the Washington Bus got me, I had a fellowship with them, and got me totally plugged in. And I feel like Seattle is a really small, big city, and I would say build relationships, talk to people. People are friendly, and we're actually a really small political family, so don't be afraid to get involved. Yes.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Get involved, show up to things, join an organization, read the newspaper. You'd be shocked how many, read lots of newspapers, read every newspaper.
Read the Emerald.
Yeah, specifically the South Seattle Emerald, which can be found at southseattleemerald.com.
Thank you for that shameless plug.
Yes. It is, but truly though, read the newspaper. There's lots of good things out there. There's Outside City Hall. There's good blogs to read. Erica Barnett, who was here earlier tonight, does a really good job of covering local politics. I feel like reading is almost more important than showing up sometimes, to be honest with you, because of all the crazy people that show up in addition.
Not in this room.
But seriously though, do everything you can to just learn about the city. There's a lot of really cool organizations like the Bus. There's lots of people here from lots of organizations that I recognize throughout the room. Just talk to people. But most importantly, I feel like it's just read as much as you can. The newspapers, everything going on in the city it's truly available at your fingertips. A lot of the inside baseball, you'd be shocked how much of it is just played out every day in the news. And when I address it with other elected officials or whatnot, they're like, really, that was in the news? So I think there's a lot to be just said about understanding the conversation and just taking part in that can be as passive as reading the newspaper every day.
I'm going to go a slightly different route on this. Your time is the most important thing you have, period. Without it, you're dead. You need to search for what it is that you are passionate about, what it is that you have to do. Not want to do, not like to do, not supposed to do, have to do. If that includes politics, absolutely get involved in politics. If that's music, do music. If that's getting a medical degree, get a medical degree. The reason I ran for office was because I was passionate about people and what happened in their lives. And this was just a continuation of that story. It wasn't because I was trying to get elected because I wanted power. It wasn't because I was trying to get elected because I had nothing else to do with my time. It was because I needed a different venue to talk about how much I cared about people. And so what I would challenge you, and what a lot of people are struggling with now in our society, is what does my life mean? And how am I going to spend my time? And what I would encourage you to do is search your soul. And it will be hard, and it will be painful, and you will try lots of different things. But once you find it, live it, eat it, follow it, and wherever it takes you, if it's politics, if it's reading, if it's to the other side of the country or another country, fucking do that. Okay?
Well, y'all, thank you for coming. It is Satan's underwear hot on the stage, so we're going to get off it, but some of us are going to stick around if you want to talk. As Mark Baumgarten is here from Seattle Weekly, I do just want to announce that the Emerald and Weekly will soon be partnering together. We'll have a monthly print publication. Continue to do some great journalism. I mean, also shout out to David Crone, he's over the back. Cross-Deck y'all was all right. But anyway, seriously, thank you all so much for coming tonight. You could have been anywhere else in the world tonight. You decided to come here, so you're doing something right, I guess. So, anyway, thank you. Have a wonderful night.